Welcome back into the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass Baseball Podcast here on this Wednesday, June 5th edition, previewing the Knoxville Super Regional as Tennessee Baseball advanced after sweeping through their own regional last weekend against Northern Kentucky, Indiana, and Southern Miss, beating all three teams and looking pretty good doing it. I'm joined by Ryan Schumpert today. Ryan, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Glad to be rolling again. One more week through here, and obviously it was kind of a pretty drama-free as far as NCAA tournament weekends go for Tennessee the opening weekend, and they're hoping to kind of make it the same this week as they host the Cinderella story of this NCAA tournament in Evansville.
64th overall seed, correct?
I've heard people say that. I
Like,
don't
is
know
is
if
that
that's
actually
true.
something you can know? I didn't
I don't.
even
I
think that
don't
was...
think they. Yeah, I don't think they really
Yeah,
announced that. Um,
right.
Like maybe they do the last four in, but that would be bubble teams. That wouldn't be an automatic bid. So I've heard people say that. I don't necessarily think that's true though, but I could be wrong. Maybe that is out there somewhere, and I just haven't seen it.
Well, definitely a Cinderella team. Of course, Evansville winning the Greenville Regional. That included 1 seed ECU, 2 seed Wake Forest, and 3 seed VCU
VCU,
in
yeah,
the A10. So Evansville, I mean, they won it because of their offense, and we'll get into a little bit more of a tail of the tape, if you will, a full preview here in a minute. But Ryan, just right off the bat, scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that Tennessee will win this Super Regional and advance to Omaha for the third time in 4 years?
9 and change. I mean, I think they're gonna win. I think they're gonna win 2 games. It's baseball. It's an unpredictable sport, and certainly Evansville didn't win last weekend by sheer luck, and they won by their offense playing really well. And essentially, what ended up happening, they won a 2 out of 3 game series against ECU on the road, and then they beat VCU in the middle of it too. So it's a good Evans. It's a 4 seed. Obviously, they're Tennessee. You'd expect to see a team that's been better over the course of the season in this round, but Evansville didn't win
Yeah.
last weekend by luck or anything like that. So I wouldn't go 10 and say that it's just a lock by any means. But it's hard not to feel really confident about Tennessee given how they're playing, and you just kind of look at some of the pitching shortcomings that this Evansville team has. It's hard not to think Tennessee's offense is gonna have another big weekend, and their pitching has been against no matter who they faced. Their pitching has been good enough to keep them in every single game outside of 1 or 2 games in the Georgia series, and they won one of those games. So it's hard not to like the Vols.
Yeah, Evansville was in the winner's bracket in that Greenville Regional. They did have to play 4 games, though, because East Carolina won the Sunday night game, forcing a Monday game that Evansville did win because they had a reliever do really well. Hansman, he completely shoved and was the reason they were able to win that game, because going to that game thinking Evansville's not going to have any pitching. Granted, ECU didn't either, but it was not as high scoring of a game maybe as you'd think, and Evansville was able to hold down ECU much better than I think a lot of people anticipated. But
Yeah.
also the Smith guy for Evansville. Am I correct in saying that he pitched twice on the weekend, or is that a different? Was it a
I
different guy who pitched Monday?
uh, I think he pitched twice. It's not the guy who started for them on Friday. Um, that was Deverman. He did not. He just pitched once, which I think is
Okay.
a big thing to note because he's the ace. And if they had to use him twice, it's hard to see really any path to Evansville winning this weekend. But they used a
Yeah,
couple guys twice. I don't think Deverman was one of them, though.
yeah, it wasn't Deverman, and I think that's what a lot of people thought was going to happen, but they didn't
Yeah.
have to do that because he pitched 8 innings against East Carolina. Yeah, Nick Smith, who started the Monday game, only pitched once on the weekend. Should have known that before the podcast. I apologize, but yes, Kenton Deverman only pitched once on the weekend. Um, he seems to be Evansville ace, 3.81 ERA on the season. Started 15 games, 118 WHIP, 106 innings pitched this year. He's pretty good. But let's talk about Tennessee for a second. Of course, sweeping through the NCAA regional in great fashion. We've touched on it a little bit, whether it be post-game stand-ups on the field, another podcast, but do you think that this was Tennessee's best weekend offensively that you can remember, at least in the past couple of months?
Yeah, definitely in the past good stretch. I think you could say, yeah, I was gonna say the Auburn series, but I don't think you could say that because it's the first game. and you could always say the same thing about the Georgia series where the offense was really good in the two final games, but it wasn't very good in one game. So I think when you talk about the totality of it and then just stacking three straight games together, yeah, it probably was at least in meaningful senses, outside of some of those early non-conference series against Bowling Green and Albany, who were just obviously very outmatched. So I think it was. I felt like you saw just things click up and down the lineup. I guess the one spot they didn't get a ton of production from was the DH spot. But besides that, I mean, Dean Curley I thought was a really positive sign. Cal Stark had one of his best weekends at the plate. The middle of the lineup was just fantastic. Really, really good from Dreiling, Inslee, and Tiers. And then the guys at the top, maybe weren't their absolute best, but Billy Amick had two huge swings. Christian Moore was still
Mhm.
good, and Blake Burke, worked a lot of walks and found himself on base a lot over the course of the weekend. So it just felt like everybody had some sort of contributions, and it felt like probably half the lineup had one of the better weekends they've had in some time.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Tennessee's 4 through 7 in the order. In that order, those were the top 4 in batting average for the regional. Dreiling, Inslee, Tiers, Curley. I think Curley was the biggest development of the weekend. Hit 333, a couple of homers. He was sitting on 9 homers since April 7th until he finally broke it
Yeah.
on Saturday, I believe. But you know, if Tennessee is able to get this production out of a guy like Dean Curley and this consistently great production out of 4 through 6, yeah, Dreiling and Tiers have been great all season long. Inslee's had a remarkable May and early part of June now, to where that's a big development in of itself. But if Tennessee can get this production from 4 through 6, I mean, it is just insanely scary 1 through 6. And Dean Curley, too, obviously can have a great weekend as we saw. But 1 through 6, Ryan, for this Tennessee lineup, it is just murder's row. And if these guys are all hitting above 375 like they were last weekend in the 4 through 6, I mean, how do you stop it?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Where you talk about whatever you get from Inslee is kind of great, but if 4 through 6 is as good as it was last weekend, I you obviously can't have 7 through 9 just be a black hole, but you just need some level of production from those guys. You don't need those guys to be great. You just need them to be able to get on base at a somewhat decent rate and let 1 through 6 do the rest. And Tiers feels like he's been really boomer bust the last 3 or 4 weeks, and not even like a weekend since. I think typically you say someone's boomer bust, you think for the weekends. I mean, it feels like particular games has kind of been that way. Like for the most part, he was great at the SEC tournament, and then in the SEC championship game against LSU, he went over 4 with 4 strikeouts or something to that
Yeah.
extent where he really struggled. So it feels like he as a whole is hitting really well. There might be some games where he struggles. Dreiling is to me one of the more consistent hitters on the team, just from a getting on base standpoint and working competitive at bats. Might not always be home runs or big swings, but you just feel like the floor with him is really high. And then Inslee is the guy that I think is changed a lot for the lineup just because he was hitting so poorly for a large portion of the season, where it felt like, all right, you have more guys at the back of this lineup that they need to get something from, where that potential real big divide could be. I mean, Tony's talked about it, not really ever with this offense, but a lot of offenses in the past, at least 21 and 22, about how you could flip the lineup and do it 9-1 instead of 1-9, and it would still be really good. That offense hasn't really had that. Um, but when Inslee was struggling, like, it was to me more of a real concern because you had more. It felt more like a close to a 50-50 divide. But Inslee's just
Mm.
been. I mean, it's been past return to form. I mean, he's been unbelievable. Going back to
Yeah.
that game 3 against Florida, which I think was a Friday night, or excuse me, a Saturday night game. I don't know. That's besides the point. But it was on May 3rd. 17 games since then. He's hitting 393. His on base percentage is 534. He has 3 home runs, 7 doubles, and 18 RBIs in 17 games. So, in a year where for nearly 3 months or 2.5 months, he really struggled at the plate. Now, after this last 3 week month stretch, I guess it's been a month now. This past month stretch, his numbers look back to like they did last year when he was one of Tennessee's best hitters on a team that went to the College World Series, and I think because of that, this lineup just has more depth, more punch to it, and it's I think it's if anything makes me feel more confident about this Tennessee offense than I have. It's just the fact that Inslee has found his gear, and has found some real consistency with it. It's not just been a 2 week thing at this point. He might not continue to hit 393 and get on base 500% of the time, but it feels like he's going to be right around that 300 range every weekend.
Yeah, and he's just clutch too. We've talked about how Dylan Dowling feels like the most clutch hitter on the team. I think Inslee is right there as maybe a 1B or just, not so distant 2 to Dryling. He has that in him to where he can, come through in big moments and deliver. And we've seen that a lot. I mean, Inslee's not a power guy. He's not going to blow you away with home runs. Yes, he has 9 on the year, but compared to other guys, I mean, you talk about Dryling, you don't think of him as a power guy. He has 19 home runs on the season.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that that's not his thing. It's not to hit for power like Burke or Billy, but he he just falls into 19 home runs because that's how talented this Tennessee lineup is. But Inslee's definitely more of a guy who's just going to have that RBI double, that RBI single to get you home, to drive you in. So, Hunter Inslee's been so clutch, and I think it's worked out beautifully with him in the 5 hole. And then when you get to the 6 hole, I mean, it's like having a 6 hole batter like Kavaris Tears is just unfair because, like you said, he can be off, but when he is on, it is insane because when he's on, he's instantly a top 2 to 3 guy in this lineup based on the power he has and just the game changing nature he can give you. I mean, we saw it with the 3-run homer there um, over on this weekend, but yeah, that 4, 5, 6, it's super dangerous, and I think that's going to be if they can stay hot, that's going to be a big reason Tennessee probably makes a run in Omaha.
Yeah, no doubt, and I think I really like Inslee at the 5 hole. I like having, like you said, he can hit for power, and certainly those numbers I read of what he's done the last month show that. But I just like his bat in the middle, and it kind of feels like it breaks up the power surge a little bit. And
Hmm.
in a spot where that 5 hole you typically come on a lot of times with runners on base, maybe 2 outs. He's a guy you feel good about his bat, really good about his bat to ball skills, and yeah, I mean, just to your point about Tiers, I mean, he's obviously was unbelievable for a good portion of the year, and he's cooled off a little bit, but still hitting 338 with 18 home runs, and both him and Dreiling work a ton of walks. I think Dreiling's
Lead
first
the
on the team
team.
with 45, Tiers is 42, and when you look at it that way, Dreiling is first on the team and on base percentage with 450. He's one spot ahead of Christian Moore, who's 449, and Christian Moore right ahead of Kavaris Steers at 447. So those are two guys that you're talking about. They're hitting in the middle of Tennessee's lineup, the 4 and 6 hole. And they have power, but they're also been getting on base at just a really, really high rate.
Cal Stark mentioned him a little bit, but had a huge Sunday against Southern Miss. And Ryan's made a good point of multiple times of saying we kind of seen this from Cal Stark, where yeah, he has power. He's not one of the best hitters on the team by any stretch. But when he's able to run into one, it can leave the yard in a hurry. And he hit 2 400+ feet home runs, 2 420+ feet home runs Sunday against Southern Miss to have one of the best days of his season. So Cal Stark, the power is there, home run hitting ability is there. He's always going to give you a good at bat. Yes, he can struggle with strikeouts sometimes too, but Cal Stark, I think maybe it's different than Dean Curley, and you were the first to say this. I'll give you credit. It's different than Dean Curley in that this Cal Stark weekend happens sometimes. Maybe you can't rely on it as consistently, but Dean Curley doing this may be sort of a turnaround given how you know unproductive he was for the past month, at least not consistent production. Now, if Dean Curley's able to give you this, which it kind of looked like early season Dean Curley, that would be huge.
Yeah, no doubt. And on the Carly side of it, it's like his bad stretch. I guess the South Carolina weekend's the only one I'd say he was just truly really bad. Besides that, it's like the rate he's getting on base and his average isn't really awful. It's bad compared to the rest of Tennessee's offense, but that if he has a little bit of power mixed into that, it's like, okay, this is still big because it's just for so long it was single walk. He wasn't going to get more than one base. It didn't feel like an idiot bat. So when you're hitting 220 over the course of the weekend, maybe a walk or two added on, it's like that's not a black hole, but it's not very good. If you're hitting 220 over the course of the weekend, and one of those is a home run or one of those is a big double in a big spot, it feels like, all right, that production's a lot more, and you've come through in a big spot. And I think that's where you start to look at, can Dean Curley just raise his floor a little bit towards the back half of the ceiling? I think we've already seen that no doubt he just raised the ceiling with what he did in an NCAA regional, because we haven't seen anything like that from him in a while. So I don't think
Mhm.
it's fair to expect him to do what he did this past weekend with that ceiling with any sort of consistency the rest of the way. But he's obviously a really talented player, and it feels like if he can get some confidence and get a little bit of mojo, he could really help this team. And yeah, I mean, Cal, to me, it felt a lot like the Auburn series, to be honest. This past
Yeah.
weekend, where he was pretty good the first two games, got on base at a good clip. Obviously, he hit a home run on Saturday for Tennessee. I'm not sure if he did the first two games of that Auburn series, but in the Sunday game, he just goes crazy in a game where they score a bunch of runs. So, granted, I mean, the first home run he hit gave Tennessee the lead, so it was a big home run. Um,
Against Southern Miss. Yeah.
against Southern Miss. So it's, you're not expecting him to do that again. Again, it's good to see him after what again had been a little bit of a cold stretch, to see his bat heat up. But he's a guy that I think is very aware of when he has bad weekends at the plate and what he needs to do to be a to give some net positive in the lineup to go along with being good behind the plate as a catcher.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And you know, also, I'm not trying to take anything away from Cal Stark, but the Southern Miss late in the first home run, yes, was very important. Gave Tennessee the lead. But at the end of the game, like Southern Miss was completely out of pitching. And Tennessee was teeing off on dudes with 27 ERA. So it was a little bit of a midweek feel there in the final 3 to 4 innings, wouldn't you say? When Tennessee just really
Yeah,
opened it up.
yeah, definitely to some degree because they just had so many base runners. I will say, not that it really matters, but have to be the Cal Stark defender here. Someone has to do it. Um, Cal Stark really didn't hit well in midweek games this year. So
Well, he didn't play in him.
well, he played in them for a while. He didn't play in them the last month of the season or 5 6 weeks. He played in a lot of midweek games early in the year, or in the non-conference games he played in against teams that weren't very good. He did not hit very good. Like his offensive stats for most of the year were better in SEC play than they were in non-conference play. So you're right. It wasn't a high stakes home run, but I guess just from the sense of the fact, like I completely agree with that, and I think that's the point you're making. I would just say he's not somebody that is like terrorized bad competition this year. So I think anytime he has some level of success, it's a good thing for him from like a confidence standpoint. It's not necessarily like a Robin Villeneuve or a Colby Backus who has terrorized non-conference teams and hasn't done a whole lot in SEC play. So it's like, it probably is nice for them to do something good in a midweek type feel, but there's still that lingering doubt. To me, Cal hitting has been the same against whoever it's with, and it's not been great. So I'm not trying to pump it up as if it is, but from a seeing success and being able to build some confidence off of that, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. I don't think it made a huge difference from that aspect.
All right, I'm gonna have to bring this up here. He has 2 at bats in midweek games this season.
There's no way.
I
I
promise
refuse
you.
to believe that.
I
That's crazy.
Kansas State 0 for 1 at the plate. I don't know if he started that game. Doesn't I mean, he didn't draw a walk and he didn't get hit by a pitch, so I doubt it. 0 for 1 at the plate against or he got pulled early. 0 for 1 against Kansas State. Came in against Southern Indiana but didn't have an at bat. Didn't draw a walk or hit by pitch either. Eastern Kentucky went 1 for 1 at the plate with grand slam. So he hit a grand slam against Eastern Kentucky. And then Xavier, the last midweek game appeared in, did not have an at bat. So he appeared in 4, had an at bat in 2, has 1 midweek hit on the season, and it is a grand slam
All right.
against
Well,
Eastern
my
Kentucky.
point was completely void. I will say, and granted, SEC tournament would have some impact on this. He has 68 at bats in conference play this year, and he has over the course of the season to do 107. So there is still a gap there, whether it be, like I said, some of that
Yeah.
would be this past weekend, some of that would be conference tournament, and maybe it's just those early season non-conference games, but, uh, I'm very surprised by that.
Oh, you're fine with 7, 2 for 8. He went 2 for 8 against, oh, let's extend to Illinois. 12. He went 3 for 13 in Tennessee's 3 non-conference series against UAlbany, Bowling
Okay.
Green, and Illinois. So that
Be 13
is,
there, I think it was 10 at bats this past weekend, so that'd be 23, and
he
what'd
had
you
3
say?
at bats in Arlington,
Okay, 3 at bats in Arlington.
and
Yeah.
he went over 3, by the way. So it's 3 of 16 in Tennessee's non-conference play early season, not midweek. Anyway, I can see what you're saying.
Cam Sutton back to Pittsburgh Steelers, by the way, but sorry, that's
Oh wow.
I can't believe he got a contract, but okay, that's
I
beside the
can't
point.
either. No, that is surprising. Anyway, moving on. Let's talk about the
Moving
DH
on,
spot real
yeah.
quick. Um, Reese Chapman starts twice. I don't think he was like he wasn't great Friday against Northern Kentucky. Did have a hit. Um, 1 for 4 at the plate, struck out twice. But Saturday against Indiana, he was dreadful. 0 for 5 at the plate with 4 strikeouts. And Sunday, Tennessee shifted gears a little bit. Starts Dalton Bargo, who doesn't have a hit. Um, they experiment a little bit with Bradkey Laurie in a pinch hit spot. Did get a hit by pitch in his first AB. Well, it's not an AB, but first time at the
That
plate.
appearance.
Yeah, and struck out the next time. Cannon Peebles is the next to have an opportunity, gets hit by a pitch, later scores. So we saw 3 guys, come in at the DH spot Sunday against Southern Miss, one on Friday against North Kentucky, one on Saturday against Indiana. Both of those days it was Reese Chapman. So Reese Chapman still feels like he's at the top of this pecking order, but he really didn't have a weekend to where you can say, oh, it has to be Reese Chapman. Whereas in Hoover and just a little bit before Hoover, it felt like Reese Chapman was almost a must in that spot. Now, after a weekend like this, we're almost back to square one.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and, I don't know if it's the hamstring, obviously, that was bothering him in Hoover, and he didn't end up starting the final game. It kind of feels like that's unfortunate, maybe got him out of a rhythm a little bit, but you're right. I don't know if I feel like it's completely square one, but this past weekend, what they got from the DH spot was about square one of
Yeah.
the problem there and whatever it would have been in early May and late April where they just got no production. So yeah, I don't. It still feels like it's probably Chapman getting that'll get the start on Friday. It is Deverman is a left-handed pitcher, and it feels like unless they go to Cannon Peebles, which they haven't shown too much of a willingness to do that. He's only started one game at DH. It does feel like Chapman is the guy they like the most against lefties, given that Bargo's a lefty too, and so we'll see. It feels like Chapman is still the lead guy in that spot, but he certainly didn't, like you said, he didn't do anything to solidify that this past weekend. And if things don't start out well for him over the course of any given weekend, I'd expect to see the rollout will of who gets an opportunity.
Pitching wise for Tennessee, past weekend, it was mostly lockstep. Chris Stamos only got Tennessee 1 out on Friday against Northern Kentucky. Ran into some trouble early against a really good Northern Kentucky lineup. And, Tony Vitello had the quick hook for him, brings in AJ Kazi in the first. AJ Kazi absolutely shoves for the next 6 2/3. One of the best AJ Kazi performances of the season. Ryan and I have talked about on this very podcast about how Tennessee may need Chris Stamos and definitely Xander Sechrist on a little bit higher level to eat 9 to 12 outs on a games, and for Stamos about 6 to 9 to feel good about your pitching depth. Certainly in a tournament, but even for a series, and Chris Stamos only getting 1 out puts Tennessee behind. Didn't matter. AJ Kazi's outing completely canceled it out. Kirby Cannell finishes things on Friday. It was a very normal Friday for Tennessee's pitching staff as far as who pitched, but the way it kind of happened was a little bit different, with Stamos only pitching .1 innings. On Saturday, though, this is the big storyline of the weekend. Drew Beam looked great first 2 innings. Has to wait a long time as Tennessee's having these half-hour innings at the plate, teeing off on Indiana. Then loses his command a little bit, starts to struggle. gets pulled in the fourth inning after getting two outs there, so pitching 3 2/3 on the day. Andrew Behnke comes in, Ryan, and to me, this is the best we've seen Andrew Behnke all year. I know he was great in Hoover against Mississippi State, but when you look at what Andrew Behnke was able to do in this regional game against Indiana, that Tennessee was up and they had a comfortable lead, but still Indiana's a good team, and you never know. So Andrew Behnke pitching 3.1 innings, only allowing 3 hits, no runs, striking out 3 while walking 2. If Tennessee can have this version of Andrew Behnke consistently, I mean, there's no worries with this pitching staff, at least for me.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'd almost say. It didn't feel lockstep this weekend for Tennessee's pitching. Stamos had one of his worst outings. Beam had one of his worst outings. But I think that's what's so encouraging about it is that despite those facts, it didn't really matter. They didn't even have to use Kirby Cannell twice, which they've had to use in a lot of weekends. And certainly it was Kazi who picked things up for Stamos on Friday with what you said was one of his best outings, and then Behnke who picked things up for Beam, and it feels like Behnke's been mostly been a specialist type guy, get a lefty out here or there, and then sometimes be a bridge guy. But it's kind of been that Saturday bridge between when he has been in that role between Beam and Aaron Combs. But for him to be able to step up and be a bridge guy through that many innings because uh, Beam didn't pitch well, I thought was incredibly impressive and certainly a good sign. I don't like you said if he does that consistently, I don't think there's any reasons to have any doubts about this Tennessee pitching staff. I don't think it's I'm not to the point where I trust him to do that consistently, but it was a big step in me being able to trust him to give him an inning and say, "All right, go, go do. Here's the seventh inning. Go get 3 guys out for Tennessee." And certainly it was a really good sign there. And it just feels like even though Dylan Loy and Marcus Phillips pitched in that game, it didn't pitch great. It just feels like all 3 of those guys, the trust level is going up a little bit in them. And it feels like they're capable of helping Tennessee. And what I guess Phillips got 1 out and Lloyd didn't get any, if my memory serves. So if you go
Yeah.
into a weekend and you would have said, all right, you got 3 2/3 innings from those 3 guys, and I think they combined to give up 1 or 2 runs, like you would have probably taken it. They those numbers combined might not be perfect, but they're still pretty stable, and I think that's just what you need. You need after that first 7, you need some guys you can hand the ball to and expect to get outs and crap not to hit the fan.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I mean, Tennessee didn't even have to take Andrew Behnke out of the game. He's at 53 pitches. I don't really know what his ceiling is. Maybe it's close to around there, I would imagine, given the way he's been used this season. But, he was, there was no reason to really take him out. He was doing so well. Tony Vitello just went to Marcus Phillips and Dylan Loy for that inning. Phillips ran into some trouble. Loy inherited some base runners, allowed 2 more hits that, scored runs and go on Marcus Phillips' stay. So he ends up giving 2 earned runs. And then Aaron Combs comes in and, shuts it down like he always does because Tennessee was maybe flirting a little bit too much with fire there and, getting too close to the fire, I should say. Still a big lead, but Aaron comes in and pitches the final 1.2 innings, strikes out 4 of 7 batters faced. And then on Sunday, Xander Sechrist, who I think we should talk about a little bit, really good start for Xander. I think he looked super crisp. It was I mean, coming off back-to-back 6 inning starts against South Carolina and Vanderbilt, it was like, here we go again. Xander Sechrist about to shove all day long for 5 6 innings. But then, he works out of a great jam there in the second, excuse me, or third. Was it third?
Third, yeah, it was the third. He
Yeah,
retired the first 7 guys.
that's right. It was the third inning after retiring the first 7. But then in the fourth, takes a comebacker right off the knee, down for a long time. Could hear a pin drop in Lindsey Nelson Stadium, but he's able to, bounce back after that and continue pitching. I thought it was a really resilient performance from Sechrist and, just shows kind of his toughness.
No doubt, and on top of obviously the line drive, which I mean looked brutal, and certainly with as long as he was down, I don't think anybody expected him to come back in and pitch. So that was really impressive, and just he worked around a lot of miscues from his defense. They didn't do him any favors. In that third inning, you talk about he gives up one run unearned, but it was like the runner gets on base, a walk, which was just kind of really good at bat. I think 8 or 9 pitches, tipped the cap to the batter, a bunt single, then a Blake Burke throwing error trying to get the force out at second, scored a run, and it gave Seller missed runners on the corners with one out, and to limit it to one run, I thought was impressive. And then his day ends in the fifth inning. He gives up a 2-run double, would have already been out of the inning if it weren't for a Billy Amick throwing error. So that things get away a little bit there, but still, even then, to get 2 outs and set Nate Snead up in a spot that wasn't bad, despite giving up to the double to take the lead, I thought it was really impressive. And I guess that's Nate Snead was really good too, really drama free. Not a ton of strikeouts, not a ton of excitement, but not a ton of base runners either. That kind of feels like almost the most ideal thing for Tennessee over the course of a weekend where they don't have to use Nate Snead until game 3, and Xander goes deep enough into the game that you can just hand it to Nate Snead, and Snead can take you to the finish line without feeling like he really, really was pressed at the end of the game. And I felt like that was probably really encouraging. And it almost feels like to me on both Friday and Sunday, if things go perfect for Tennessee, they have to use 2 pitchers. It doesn't happen on Friday much because you're asking
Cause you go a pretty
Stamos
long
to
time. Yeah.
yeah, you're asking Stamos to probably go 3 innings, which he's only done a couple times, and then being such a strikeout guy, Causey just typically throws a lot of pitches, and it's hard for him to get to 6. But it feels like if everything goes right on Friday and Sunday, you only have to use those 2 guys if you're Tennessee. And certainly that's exactly what happened with Seacrest and Snead splitting it right down the middle.
Right. And feels like there's 2 different types of Nate Snead outings. He can come in late game, high leverage spot. That's when the velo's up a couple ticks into the triple digits, and he's throwing 20, 25 pitches, and it's just electric stuff in a closer type spot. But then there's this extended relief type of Nate Snead that we've gotten quite a bit to this season, where it's 4.1 innings, hyper efficient, only 54 pitches for his outing, and obviously giving up no runs, all scoreless. So there's 2 different types of Nate Snead. He's probably the most versatile pitcher Tennessee has. And, I think it's good to know that he can be used in multiple different ways, and Tennessee's probably going to need that come Omaha.
No doubt. Yeah, it's really encouraging. And I think something that's not completely new to this weekend, but it's this weekend maybe just cemented my feeling towards it. That to me, it feels like Tennessee's 3 best pitchers are all in their bullpen.
Yeah.
They might not ask the most out of those 3 guys. Drew Beam, I would still say, is the first or second most important pitcher. But to me, it feels like Causey, Combs, and Snead are Tennessee's 3 best pitchers.
Be hard to push back on that, no doubt about it. Let's talk a little bit about Tennessee's super regional matchup against Evansville. Asked for a number on a scale of 1 to 10 at the top of the show. Tennessee loses the super regional if blank. Fill in the blank for me.
If That's a good question. I think it's probably if Evansville, over the course of 3 games, scores 25 plus runs. I think it's got to be something in that range. I just don't see. I think my bigger fear for Tennessee as a whole, like when I think Tennessee's season will end, will be when their offense falls flat,
Mm-hmm.
or their offense doesn't do enough. But I just with the pitching that Evansville has, I don't see that happening this weekend. At Lindsey Nelson Stadium, I would just be super, super surprised. So I think it's going to have to be maybe the offense not being fantastic, but I think it's going to be at the pitching that would really let Tennessee down.
Yeah, and I get that the offense is a better unit than Tennessee's pitching staff, but I just feel like this pitching staff's been so consistent for too long now. And yeah, I've seen the numbers on Evansville pitching staff. It's not great. Tennessee should tee off this weekend, but I mean, I agree with you that if Tennessee's season were to ever end, it's going to be because they have a down game or a down couple of games offensively against, a pitcher with maybe a funky look. I mean, we've seen it. Ackenhausen last year, LSU was out of pitching for that game, and look what happened. That's how Tennessee's season ended. Look at the Notre Dame guy 2 years ago, appearing twice in the weekend and shutting Tennessee down, the freshman lefty. So it feels like, you know, I think that could happen again for this Tennessee team. But against a team like Evansville, I know they have a good offense, but I just still would say, if I was filling in the blank, that if their season were to end, it'd be because of Tennessee's offense falling flat. Granted, against this pitching staff, hard to foresee that happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's all hard to foresee. So I mean, I think that's fair. I'd pivot what I said. I think I said 25 runs over 3 games. I think it would be 2 games where they give up 8 plus runs. That would be more, realistic because you got to lose 2 games. So I think it'd be 2 games where they give up 8 or more runs, and the offense just has one of those games. Like, I just don't see Tennessee's offense in any of these games getting shut down. But Tennessee's offense has some of those games, like we've seen for a while in the last month, where had a lot of 6, 7 run games, and they won 7-4 or 7-5.
Hmm.
One of those type of things where 6 or 7 is not enough. So you're right. I mean, you're just kind of picking and choosing things at this point because I don't think either of the scenarios we talked about feel all that likely. Which is, it's why it for us is hard to see Tennessee not win this weekend.
Does this super regional make it to Sunday?
I don't think so because I
I don't
knocked
think
my
so either.
desk with my knee hard. Yeah, I don't. I just don't. I don't see it. I mean, maybe it goes back to what you just said. I just have confidence in the pitching that it's going to be good, and obviously in a series that's best of 3 and not 3 games. If Tennessee wins game 1, I think you'll see them be real. If they win game 1, then they can be really aggressive with how they use both Aaron Combs and Nate Snead have the bullpen in game 2 to try to shut it down after 2 games. So, I think if they lose a game, it has to be game 1 just because of Deverman, or maybe it doesn't have to be. That would be my pick for the game. I think they would lose because of Deverman for Evansville, and him doing to Tennessee similar to what he did to East Carolina last week, where I think he gave up 1 run in 8 innings.
Yep.
And I don't think it would be quite that dramatic, but a really good outing where he eats a ton of outs. I think it would have to be something like that. But even in that scenario, AJ Causey's been so good. It feels like even if Deverman does that, Tennessee's going to be right in the thick of the game late in the game.
Yeah. I mean, Deverman is just clearly head and shoulders above Evansville other starters. Donovan Schultz should start game 2. He did last weekend against VCU. Gives up 5 runs in 6 innings, and then it was Kevin Reed who started the third game for Evansville against East Carolina when they lost. Gave up 7 runs in 3 innings. So the pitching wasn't great for Evansville on that Sunday night against ECU. They were able to scrounge it all together for the Monday game and get through it. As I said, that Max Hansman was really the MVP of that game, able to keep ECU at bay, allow Evansville to win the regional. But should be a fun weekend in Lindsey Nelson Stadium, regardless. Friday's game, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern. I've seen a lot of, you know, anger on Twitter or X from Tennessee fans about maybe the lack of prime time for this weekend, just it being an 11-3 first pitch. But when you really think about it, Ryan, this on paper should be a complete blowout of a series. I mean, Tennessee should dominate 2 games and just it's it's basically a bye to Omaha when you look at these 2 teams and how it should play out. Anything can happen, sure, but how it should play out, it shouldn't be close. And the TV to me makes sense.
Yeah, it does to me too. I mean, I get why people are upset. At least people who, I guess, twofold: people who are going to go to the games, and just anybody on Friday because the game starts at 3 p.m. on a work day. So I get why people are upset. But any conspiracy theory that the NCAA they're out to get Tennessee, they're out to make it hard, like that, to me that feels silly. So yeah, it makes sense. I think you've seen that. I mean, we were talking about it before we started recording. The game 3, if it is needed, would be at 6 p.m. on Sunday. So, if it all of a sudden gets to a game 3, and it's like, oh, wow, this might happen. Well, then it is on prime time and it becomes more interesting. But uh, Tennessee, just especially compared to all the other series this weekend, massive, massive favorites. So I think most people are expecting this one to be not have too much drama.
You think Florida can get it done against Clemson. Let me just ask you this question: how many SEC teams are in Omaha?
Okay, I think Georgia will win. I think Texas A&M will win. I'll say 3. I'll say the others don't, but I really wouldn't be surprised if I wouldn't be surprised if either of them win, but
You
in
don't
this
think
scenario,
Kentucky wins?
I think Oregon State wins,
Ooh,
um,
it's a little spicy.
and I'll go with Clemson. Though to me, all of these are close to toss-ups, it's the super
Yeah.
regionals, but I have more confidence in Florida winning than I do Kentucky winning,
Wow,
which I think
that's kind
goes
of
to
a hot
more of
take.
my it is a hot take, but it goes more to my lack of confidence in Clemson. Nothing that Clemson did last weekend, capped up with Eric Bakich celebrating like he won the Daytona 500 as they won the regional, inspired a whole lot of confidence in Clemson for me. Uh, and Florida is certainly a program that made it to the College World Series finals last year, and it feels like maybe we'll be more ready for that type of moment, that type of and they won't have the pressure. They'll be playing with no pressure. We're Clemson. We'll be playing with a bunch of it.
Kind of funny where you've linked this year's LSU team to Tennessee's team last year so much,
Yeah,
and it made a lot of sense. Well, maybe it's Florida because 13-17 in the regular season in the SEC. Granted, Tennessee was a little bit better than that, but not a great regular season. One and done in Hoover, and
yeah.
now they've won their regional, got a super. Going on the road, they can get it done and make us Omaha. What a run that'd be for the Gators. Would definitely be impressive given how their regular season went. But
Yeah,
we're
I'd
gonna
almost
go ahead.
I was just gonna
Yeah, go
add
ahead.
to that point. To me, it almost feels like LSU was still Tennessee. It was just Tennessee Tennessee lost to Clemson. Like those LSU North Carolina games felt like 50-50 games. The Tennessee Clemson game last year felt like a 50-50 game. Um, and that's just kind of how it bounced. And obviously UNC got to win, and it felt like last year. I guess Tony even said it this past weekend that Clemson game really could have gone either way, and there wasn't a whole lot any sort of difference in who won. So that's kind of the vibe I got. Just because I don't know, Florida has never inspired confidence in me this season. I guess until they
Yeah,
won that Oklahoma State game. Because that was really impressive for them to come out of the losers bracket and win twice.
right. And to your point, LSU UNC went to extras like
It's a
Tennessee
good point
Clemson.
too.
Granted, it was on a different
Yeah,
day on Monday, but
with some
still.
ninth inning scoring to force the game to go into extras.
Yep.
Uh, Not quite as dramatic. Not, I guess Tennessee was down by 2, scored 3, and then Clemson scored 1. But yeah, a lot of back and forth in that one.
We're gonna get out of here. That's Ryan Schumpert. You can follow him at rshump00. I'm at Jack Foster Media, and of course, follow Rocky Top Insider on all social media platforms at Rocky Top Insider. Also, stay up to date on RockyTopInsider.com for all your Tennessee baseball coverage needs. We'll have live update threads from Lindsey Nelson Stadium for all 2, maybe 3 games this weekend in Knoxville. By the way, ESPN2 is the channel for both of those first 2 games on Friday and Saturday. But again, for Ryan, I'm Jack. See you next time.